What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Good Wolf Project. I'm your host, Jerry Scarlato, and today's conversation is with Brian Berneman. Brian is the founder of Conscious Action, in which he helps us understand ourselves better so that we can unpack our lives, get out of our own way, realize how our past traumas are impacting our current lives, and how we can work through those to move forward better. And that's a lot of what we end up talking about today. Brian is really knowledgeable and has a lot of wisdom and a lot of spiritual teachings. And he understands a lot about how we can become more conscious in our lives and how we can look back in our previous life, if you will, not previous life, but our previous self, and use our experiences differently and look at our experiences differently and view our experiences differently, our traumatic experiences that we carry with us today, how we can take those, go back in time, grab them, look at them differently, change our perspective about them, and then bring ourselves back to today so that we can move forward in a more effective and efficient way, so that we can grow better as a human, so that we don't feel stuck, so we don't have these reactionary tendencies that are carried forward from our previous, from when we were in our teenage years and when we were children. So this is a very spiritually felt episode and conversation, one of which I totally appreciate and one of which I was completely enamored with as we were going through it. So you'll want definitely a pen and paper as you're going through this yourself, because my mind is still, this is immediately after the conversation, my mind is still processing a lot of what Brian had to say. So before we get to that, make sure that you hit pause real quick, go and review the podcast. You can give us up to a 5-star review on whatever platform you're using. Remember, anytime you do that, you are helping somebody else. Anytime you review the podcast, you are helping somebody else, because the more reviews we have, the more people we reach. When someone finds this, it is because you did it. It's because you chose to review and you chose to share with other people. So thank you so much for doing that. Greatly appreciated. Now that we're back, now that you've done that, remember, get that pen and paper out so that you can take some notes and enjoy this conversation with Brian Berneman. Brian, good to see you today. I am so excited about this conversation because I think that what we're going to end up talking about most of the time, actually, I think this whole conversation is going to end up being some of the most important things that people can think about. It's one of the most overarching topics that controls our lives, but that we just aren't conscious about, which is what we'll dig into a little bit. Before we get to that specific area, I am curious how you got into the field of consciousness is not the right way to put it, but how you became enamored with this idea of living more consciously.
Yeah, thank you, Cherry. I think that I grew up in the typical life back in Argentina, and middle class family, going to school, sports, and I was really disconnected from my experience back then. I was really stressed out. I didn't know how stressed out I was until I saw differently. And it was actually through my parents' exploration of themselves. They started their own personal journey when I was a kid, and I started to see, like some changes at home. Suddenly, we were eating instead of in front of the TV watching something. We started to sit in the dining room having conversations. The conversation started to change a little bit. The topics that we were talking about changed a little bit. And by the time that I was a teenager, my parents were, reading all of these books, and I was interested in some of these books. And then I was like, oh, wow, this is interesting. And then they started to invite me and my siblings if we wanted to go to some meditation classes with them, or to some, Buddhist classes, or some energy healing sessions. And for some reason, I said yes. Later on, I realized that I was just searching something that would actually be my thing because I couldn't find what that was. I felt like an outsider. If I had friends, but I always felt a little bit like an
Felt
outsider.
different.
I was super stressed out. Yeah, I was super stressed out. And no, I still enjoy the regular things like everybody else. And I saw something here. Not only was that I started to reconnect with myself, I also saw that there's a different perspective on how to live life that made more sense to me. So throughout my teenage years, I started to explore more of this, and I tried, different classes, different methodologies, different techniques, and a lot of different things. And little by little, I just started to go deeper into these perspectives and how to first how to live more like connected with myself, how to be less stressed, how to be more healthy, and suddenly that started to expand to like, okay, there's more to this. There's an exploration of what it means to be human. There's an exploration on there's no separation. There's an exploration on how to be more conscious all of the time. And understanding that at the end of the day, all that I was doing is becoming more aware. And that was the entire thing, becoming more aware and through doing that, becoming more aware not only of what was inside, but also what's outside of me, knowing that eventually I came to realize there's no inside and there's no outside. So, I was really fortunate to have my parents' journey informing that for me. And then I did my own thing. But to be able to have this introduction as a teenager, I still got really stressed out. I still had, when I was driving, at 16, road rage and a
Get
lot of
worked up.
different
Yeah.
things.
Hmm.
Um, it was, I think that those late teen years, like 18, 19, 18, 19, 20, 21, those years for me were where I made a lot of the changes that then now for the past 20 years, I've been just sharing.
That's pretty incredible because not many teenagers I couldn't I've never met a teenager that goes through I say go through enlightenment somewhat jokingly, but nonetheless that goes through some level of experience where they're like, "Hey, I want to get to know myself better," right? I want to get to understand myself better. I want to get to understand why I am the way that I am and why the world is the way that it is. So, it's
Yeah,
incredible that you saw your parents making changes and how that change in environment shifted you. I think
yeah,
people just don't appreciate so much that the environment that they set for their children is going to dictate how their children will grow up through their teen years and then into their adult years.
yeah.
I'm curious, do you know what caused your parent you said your parents you could notice that things started to change, that you ate at the dinner table instead of sat in front of the TV, that you had different conversations instead of talking about the weather, you started talking about philosophy, whatever the conversation went to. Do you know what it was for them? I'm curious that caused the change.
I think that especially for my mom, I think that it was a wanting to expand. I think that uh, you know, everybody goes there through their own journey. But I remember my parents, my family comes from a Jewish background, and my parents started to go to these classes on Kabbalah, which is the esoteric teachings of Judaism, which most Jewish people don't even go there because it's too spiritual. Um,
Too spiritual, you said?
yes.
Interesting.
Uh, and I think that that was one of the things that led my parents in that journey because through that exploration on or that classes, my mom started to be interested in astrology. So then she started to study astrology and she became an astrologer. They through that they actually went to take classes on Buddhism and Tibetan yoga because they wanted to have not only just the mind, understanding. They wanted to have more of a physical understanding of what they were studying in terms of energy. And I think that that was what sparked for my parents that exploration. I'm sure that, afterwards, there's a realization, okay, there were a lot of things to heal. There was a lot
Mm-hmm.
of disconnection. And through that, they found that. And I know that my mom was the leading person in terms of
Mm-hmm.
for both of my parents.
Mm-hmm.
My dad always followed, but at that time my dad was more focused on work and providing and all of that,
Mm-hmm.
and doing this on the side.
That's pretty cool. Yeah, that's still amazing that at 17 or 16 years old, whenever it was that you started to kind of go down your own journey, that's still pretty incredible. Which leads us perfectly actually into the first idea I wanted to talk about. And I'm glad you said the word healing because we all have experience in our youth and teen years and so on that impact us in our 30s, 40s, 50s, and well beyond that even. And one of my favorite quotes, which I was going to save for later, but this is the perfect time to say it, is from Carl Jung. Unless you make the unconscious conscious, it'll dictate your life and you will call it fate. So those experiences impact us, and we do one of two things with them. Either number one, we bury them or ignore them or pretend like they don't impact us. Or number two, if we choose to go down that path to figure out why we are the way we are, we grasp onto it and we let it identify us. Now, there's, of course, plenty of in between, but I think that those are the two opposing ideas that people will naturally kind of grasp onto. I used to be the one that would grasp onto bury it, ignore it, pretend like it's not there. And I'm going to go ahead and say, no, what are you talking about? It's because something that happened when I was 15 years old and the way my dad used to treat me is the way that I am now. No way. That's not the case. So I think there's a better way. And I heard a couple of your videos and on a couple of your podcasts, you talk about a better way to go about figuring out experiences that have impacted you and then how you can start to work through them instead of hang on to them. So,
Mm.
can you start to unpack that idea for me a little bit?
Yeah, I think I'm going to start this by saying this is very complex because, as you're saying, we all are unique. We all have our unique experience. And as well, understanding trauma, which is this, everything that has been unconsciously there, anything that we weren't able to process, that is what we call trauma. Sometimes people call it blockages, energetic blockages, trauma. It doesn't matter what we call it. There's things that we weren't able to process that we're carrying. Now, one of the main things that as well I always like to share is we are already perfect. We are whole. We are enlightened beings already. In the Buddhist teachings, we learn that we all are already enlightened beings. We just don't see it. And a lot of times with my clients and through the years with all of my students, I share that the process of healing is a return to that wholeness. So we're not trying to achieve anything from outside. All that we're doing is realizing what is already us. So the process, of course, it's different for everyone, but one of the biggest things from what it is that you're sharing is to understand how the past already happened, and at the same time, there is no such thing as time. Time is a construct, and we can actually go back and we can change how we are relating to what happened. So I know, for example, I'm going to share one of my experience. When I was a teenager, my grandpa passed away. I was in the hospital, and when the doctor came out, I literally froze. Like, I remember I was with my hands just up here, and I couldn't move my. I remember my auntie came and she tried to move my hands and like and hug me. I literally froze in that moment. And it wasn't until years later that I learned how to be with all of this that I sat down And I went back to that experience. And what I did was I actually felt it, but with the capacity that I have now.
Mm,
So the capacity that I have developed of being able to be with the experience that I couldn't in that moment because I didn't have that capacity, I didn't judge that I wasn't able to. I didn't judge myself. I didn't judge the experience. I just allowed to completely feel and process that experience by embracing it and by embracing myself and that little kid that wasn't able to do anything with that. Now, I have done and worked with hundreds and thousands of people with this. And I know as well, like I have worked with people that were abused or that, like were hit and a lot of things that are perhaps in the eyes of many, it's harder or stronger or more challenging. It's the same principle. There is something that we weren't able to be with, and we need to allow that to be seen, to be embraced, and therefore that energy that is stuck and stuck in time, we can say, or stuck in space, starts to little by little be relaxed so that then that energy is actually available for us. Because in all of those spaces is where our wounds are. And those are the parts of us that we need to, in a sense, reclaim. But from a positive perspective, there's a tendency from what you're sharing, Jerry, that many people want to get rid of things. Want to, as you're saying, like there's all of these different patterns that happen because of what happened in the past. And the invitation, and this comes a lot from one of the methodologies that I use that is called systemic family constellations, that I really resonate with this idea of we don't want to get rid of anything because what we get rid of or we want to escape or we want to neglect or ignore, all of that is actually coming back in a toxic way,
mm,
whether that is for us or for someone else in the family that is going to be the one that sees it. So when we're able to actually acknowledge that getting rid of things is not the way, we want to allow ourselves to fully embrace and feel. Now, of course, and this is one of the things that I usually say, we need to reconnect with feeling. We need to reconnect with the body because most of us think things through instead of embodying them and feeling them.
mm-hmm.
And most things, the mind cannot actually do that because the mind
Process.
doesn't embody. But it does help. There's nothing wrong with the mind and using the mind. We just need to understand, okay, the mind and all of these patterns are trying to protect me. They might not be helpful nowadays, but they are trying to protect me. So the more that I develop a better relationship with my mind and with an understanding that I am not judging myself, I am not judging what happened, I am fully embracing, and I'm able to, by being with what happened in the past, I'm able to heal and I rewrite the story. I change how I'm relating to that. So then I'm able to open to something new. And, one of the things with this is that then I don't want to label that experience. I don't want to do anything other than just allow that experience to move so that from this moment forward, I can choose how I want to be. So I'm not longer a victim of what happened. What happened happened. I'm able to forgive myself on what happened or others for what happened so that I'm able to open up new possibilities moving forward. And, this is huge because mostly we don't want to take responsibility. We just want to keep on, just blaming everything or everyone else. It's easier to do that than to take responsibility and being like, actually, I need to do this.
Mm-hmm.
And for, like for some people, this is fast and easy. For some people, it takes years and it's a journey. We're all different with that. It's so important to be able to recognize that we have the power to actually change how we're relating to what happened before. And that is key.
So I can feel what you're saying. And I can tell you over the last 9+ months, 12 months or so, I've kind of done some very basic level of that, very basic. Um, because I went through a divorce and closed a business within about a 3-month time frame. And so during that time, of course, I'm trying to figure out why things didn't work. Both of them, I was married for 10 years, had the business for 10 years. And both of them were the closing the business was my choice and getting divorced was my choice, although we both kind of agreed that it was the best path to go. So for 3 6 months I'm thinking about what what were the things that I was doing that was causing some of the issues that we had in the marriage. What were some of the things that I was doing that were causing the issues that we had in the business? And a lot of what I found myself going back to was an experience or experiences as a child, specifically experiences with my dad. My dad, a very loving person, very caring person, but he was very hard to please, very hard to get acknowledgement of, hey, you did something good today. He wanted me to improve. He wanted me to be better, but it was hard for me to find, hey, Jerry, you did a good job. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So so I found myself translating that into my marriage as well, and also translating that into the business. I was like, I was forcing things into the marriage or trying to figure out how to get some sort of acknowledgement in the marriage, or in the other, I was trying too hard in the business that I was just screwing everything up because I'm trying to get acknowledgement from the people around me or from, people coming in, buying things. So I can totally feel what you're saying. I'm
Mm.
curious, what's a basic, and I know, like you said, very complex. It's some, like said, some people, this can be a relatively quick,
Mm.
thing that they can go through. For some people, it can take plenty of time, years, months and years.
Yeah.
But how can someone just start to figure it out? Just start to
Mm.
look at the idea of
Yeah.
what might be keeping them today from making more progress in their life because of this thing that happened in the past.
Yeah. First of all, thanks for sharing that. I'm being in a sense a guinea pig for this. I think that from what you're sharing, there's a few things that are important to understand. Is if you had in your childhood that experience that you weren't recognized in the way that you wanted, um, you're going to take that, as you're saying, to your adulthood, not only in your relationship, in your work, in everything that you're doing, in your relationship to yourself as well.
Mm,
One of the things that I would suggest there would be, and this, of course, as you're saying, this would take a longer exploration just to figure out exactly what are the ways that you work through things. Um, there's a couple of important things. One is you actually recognize a pattern there, which is the first step.
mm,
Then the second thing is to be kind with yourself now, because that is a pattern of survival. That's a survival mechanism. So being gentle with yourself now, that is the pattern that you have. So that also that is another way that can relax your present experience. Now, key things with that I will work with someone will be two things. One is recognizing that your dad, in this case, that as you're sharing, might have been the main person that you wanted that validation from. Your dad had his own experience of what he learned, of what his family had him experience. Therefore, when we start to see our parents not as what when we are kids, we unconsciously see our parents as everything. Whether our parents are great parents or awful parents to us, we still want to receive the love in the way that we want to. And there's no way that they can give us that. because they are not perfect
Mm.
in how they are going to behave, because they also learned all of these different patterns and these mechanisms and tendencies through their own childhood. So when we're able to see our parents like that, we start to not blame them. We start to heal our relationship with them because we understand that they did the best that they could. Now, that still created all of these patterns that we still need to unravel. Starting with that helps a lot. And then I would do this in a session with someone, for example. I would actually do a practice to bring the father figure and to have it being represented and to be able to actually verbalize and being grateful for everything, being grateful for giving us our life, being grateful for what they did, whether it was something that we liked or not, and to forgive them for having done that because they did the best that they could. At the same time, I would work with that child, that version of myself that was the one that got that experience. And I would, as an adult now, I would actually work with that. This is sometimes called inner child work. I would actually embrace that child and let him know that he's loved and that he doesn't need to do anything to receive love. So I now can give that child that didn't receive the love as the way that he wanted, I can give him that love. I can let him know that he's worthy, whether he does something or not. That actually is how we start to heal that. This needs to be as well a feeling. There needs to be a movement of the feeling that was stuck, that creating these patterns of behaviors. As we do that, we start to rewire the brain as well, because we start to create new neural pathways, because the usual neural pathway is what creates the tendency and the patterns. So we start to create something new. And therefore, when something takes place outside, there's a stimuli from outside, work, relationship, whatever it is, suddenly the pattern that would actually take place in autopilot, now suddenly there's a little pause there, there's some space, so that then we can choose, how do we want to respond? Do we want to respond in the same way that we have done? Do we want to respond in a different way? So there's a lot of different layers and a lot of more exploration. Those things, like working with being kind with ourselves for the patterns that we have, and then working with that child and that father in this case would be huge to be able to then rewrite how we experience that and how we decide to move forward. So it's I think that it's hard a lot of times for many people because, like, okay, a marriage ended, a business closed down as well, you know, that's not the end of the world. We think a lot of times that that's the end of the world because of the society that we're in and how we measure success or different things, or how our family gives us the validation of I'm a good boy. But as well, like we cannot change it. That already happened. Being able to be okay with that which happened, and then learning for the future. It's like, okay, in my past relationship, and unconsciously I behaved like this. What can I learn from if I want to have a future relationship with someone? As well, one of the key things with that, and I've seen this with a lot of my clients through the years, is that then the future relationships that they are actually with someone very different, because now they are not attracting in someone else through their wounds, through what actually they needed that was reminding them of that past as a child. So suddenly they open up to attracting someone else, therefore, as well as actively taking responsibility and choosing how to behave in a different way, there's also another person that is not going to activate that as much. So it's an interesting, experience a lot of times, But it requires that. It requires to go back and to do that work, but everything with love and compassion, being kind with ourselves.
Mm. Thank you for that, Brian. That was very in depth and very well articulated. I ran into the idea of the inner child reading a book by a guy named Nathaniel Branden. He
Mm.
he wrote a lot about self confidence and self esteem back in the 60s, 70s, and early 80s. Ironically enough, he dated Ayn Rand for a long time. I don't know if you've ever read Atlas Shrugged or Fountainhead,
Mm.
books from the 30s and 40s, which her philosophy is actually very, very interesting as well. But anyway, I ran into the inner child concept reading his when as I was going through all of this. And that's ironically that you bring it up. Another thing that I kind of recognized was one of my responses in my relationship would be essentially pouting. I I can I can call it whatever manly thing I want to call it, but it was
Mhm.
pouting. And that's the way that I would react to, wasn't a response, a react to my dad when I was 15 or 16 years old. So it's funny that you bring that up because that's a new concept for me, and I think it's something that a lot of people would do well, kind of like understanding more about. When did you
Mm.
start to realize that was something that was playing a part in a lot of people's psychology?
I think that I mean, I always am. I've been really fortunate that I had amazing teachers.
Yeah.
um, and that I remember I was studying this form of Tibetan yoga and Tibetan Buddhism. This was in my late teenage years, and a lot of that actually started to introduce some of these ideas.
Mm,
And I started to become more acquainted with myself as a child and myself in that moment through those practices. And then when I started to explore more different methodologies, I started to learn more about how we are actually just in the first 7 years of our lives, we learn all of the patterns and then we're just acting them out. And when I was doing my postgrad in neuroscience, that was as well like a big thing. It's like, okay, like most of our uh, neural pathways are created in those years. So then all that we're doing is unconsciously just repeating. And what you said is so important as well, that you actually were saying, I responded, and then you said, I reacted.
mm,
This is an important distinction that I do. I usually, one of the things that I share with people is we need to learn how to move from reacting to responding. This is bringing living in less autopilot, living unconsciously to living consciously, so that the action that we take might be the same. It's coming from a very different place. We're choosing. And when we are choosing, we are taking responsibility. There's no one else to blame. It's our choice, what we're doing. And, you know, this I often share with a lot of people that just because we're taking responsibility and we are choosing, and just because we are potentially trying to be kind and compassionate and loving, doesn't mean that everything is nice and easy and we're going to be pushed over or whatever. Like there's moments that a situation requires to put a strong boundary. I remember talking with one of my clients and he was saying like, but if my child is going towards like an power outlet, like I need to scream, stop, or I need to grab a lot of like adrenaline in that moment to go and grab my baby. And it's like, yes, it's important to recognize that, and it's important in that moment, especially for those that are parents that are hearing this. If your child is going to do anything like that, or going to potentially cross the street without seeing, and you scream to them, it's important to immediately, as much as possible, get them to understand why you reacted or responded in that way, and it wasn't about them. We need to, with the more that we are conscious, we understand through what we're talking about, that our children are going to learn from those things. So if someone shouts to their children because of something that we think is positive, we are preventing them from, electrocuting or getting hit by a car or whatever, that actually what they received was, "Dad screamed at me. I'm a bad boy. There's something wrong. I'm not worthy of love. Whatever it is that in that moment, that child that doesn't understand it actually created a pattern, a wound. If the parents are conscious enough in that moment to let them know and reassure them it wasn't about them, it was about how they were afraid, and therefore they say that in that way. That is so important because we are not going to be perfect. We are going to say things or behave in ways, even if consciously in that moment it's like, I need to scream, I need to do something. The kid is going to take it as, I am not worthy of love. I am not worthy of love. I am not worthy of love. And then they're just going to live their life like that. So if the parents can take a moment to do that, that's so important.
Mm, that's real good. That go for understanding. Let them understand why you're doing what you're doing. Don't just let them translate themselves,
Yeah,
essentially.
because they can't. They don't
Yep.
have the capacity. Like, I mean, we don't have the capacity as adults to do
Barely.
that.
Barely. If we're lucky.
We assume so much
Mm,
of what the others meant by doing what they are doing instead of understanding. And I know this has been part of my path. I understand now, and for the last 15 years, I understand what people are doing that I would say they are doing to me. I started to take that personally. I started to realize, ah, if someone did that, what did they experience to have them do that? What did they experience when they were kids to actually react in that way? Or to say that was mean, or to judge something that they have no idea about? I started to actually relax judging others and to be more compassionate through my understanding of my own experience and through understanding of all of these things that we're talking about, is that everybody's living their life through all of those blockages and all of those traumas and all of the patterns of behaviors that they learned. Everybody's doing the best that they can. It might not seem like that.
mm,
In our experience, it seems that there's people that are assholes, there's people that are, like really bad people. In my experience, everyone is a loving, kind person surviving. And surviving means that for some people, you need to protect what's your own and it doesn't matter what's others. You need to actually, put different barriers in different places. Whatever it is, the survival mechanism, it doesn't matter because I can see past that. So I can see, like, you're a loving person. You might not always act in that way, but you're a loving person. Everybody is. And when we're able to live in that way, it makes it so much difference because then suddenly the world is a different place. There's no bad people in the world. We start to change ourselves and we start to change those around us and we start to change the world just through that view. But, this requires taking agency and responsibility on, okay, I'm going to see this. And whenever that's not what comes up, because, I see something and suddenly there's a judgment, I understand, okay, that's coming up. How is that coming up? Why is that coming up? And I'm able to not act in or react through that. I'm able to, as I said, take a moment and be, is that true? Where's this coming from that I'm judging what someone else is doing or someone else? And then I'm able to act in a way that I choose. Again, I've been doing this for 20 years, so it's easier now than it was when I started. It's possible. And I think that, the more that we engage in conversations like this, the more that we're able to share with those that are parents, with teachers, with kids, all of these things, the world will be so different because, we start to deal with things easier instead of keeping the status quo and keep on pushing things down or repressing things. It's like, let's bring things in a safe way up. Let's bring things into light. And and with that, I want to say something. It's not always the right timing for everyone to unearth those things that we have repressed. We need to do things in the right timing for each of us, in the right environment, in the right way, because as well, like that can be a lot. Like, if someone was experiencing something as a child that, we weren't able to experience, and suddenly now we're like, okay, I'm just going to experience that. Like, it can be a lot. So it's just being kind and understanding, like, okay, like there's right timing for everything as well.
Mm, that's good. So we haven't even touched the tip of the iceberg. Um, I I want to go into consciousness. So I let off, and we've been dabbling about it, and we've been talking about it, and we've been, I'd say dancing around it, if you will. I started off by saying the quote from Carl Jung, unless you make the unconscious conscious, it will dictate your life and you will call it fate. I first heard that quote probably a decade ago, probably 10, 12 years ago. And when I first heard it, I didn't understand it. I'm like, okay, sure, that's a cool quote. That's fun. That's fun, whatever. But once I started to slowly unravel things, and it took some time to start to unravel things, once I started to do that, I started to recognize that basically what I'm trying to do is peel back a layer of onion and then peel back another layer of onion and then peel back another layer of onion. And that's all that you're constantly trying to do is just peel back another layer. So before we get into peeling back layers and what that even looks like, what does consciousness mean to you?
Mm, that's a great question. So for me, consciousness is everything. Some people might call this the universe. Some people might call it the God. Some people might call it nature. Some people like there's different words for consciousness. Consciousness is everything, and there is what I would say. I always liked one of the things that one of my teachers used to say. He said the universe or consciousness, there's a dynamic organizing principle. And then that same um, principle or energy is then created or sliced in a sense in different specific configurations of that which experience something different. We as humans, we are those. You have a specific dynamic energetic configuration. I have the same, that I can be like, okay, there's a consciousness that is I'm experiencing in this lifetime within this body as Brian. You are experiencing that as Cherry. And, there's the books behind me. There's a specific configuration for them. There's, for everything, whether that's animated or inanimate, it doesn't matter. What that is that it's intangible as well. Consciousness is energy. Consciousness is waves, is sound. Consciousness is,
Frequency.
yes. Now, how we experience consciousness, that's the key thing there. Because, I had this conversation once with one of my students. So I teach here at university, and one of my students once asked me, to explain further. And I'm like, cool. We can go into that, and we can use a lot of fancy words to keep on explaining that. And I was asking the student, how does that matter to you in your life? Do we want to know more, or do we want to experience more? And I think that this is one of the key things with this is that, especially from what you were sharing about that quote. what is my relationship to consciousness? How am I experiencing that? And not just because, our society is so enamored with thinking and trying to figure everything out through thought, which is great. You know, it's amazing the advancement that we have and the knowledge that we can actually understand things. We need to bring it back to actually, how does this matter to me? You know, is yes, consciousness is this amorphous thing, it's energy in all of these specific configurations. Consciousness is everything. How am I relating to that? Am I part of that? How am I experiencing that I'm a part of that? How am I experiencing that I am this specific configuration of that, which I'm experiencing that there's a separation between me and everything else, which there isn't, and at the same time there is. How can I allow all of these different perspectives on, okay, there's consciousness, and consciousness is something that is big. Like, I mean, if consciousness is everything, can I actually understand it? Or can I just understand a certain part of it? And that is just a question. That's part of the exploration. If I am a part of that, it means that I am not just, like the drop in the ocean is the ocean. It's also the drop. Can the drop actually experience what the ocean experiences? Potentially, yes. This, I think that it's an exploration. I always loved that some of my teachers used to tell me, all of this is an exploration, you know, just go and try things out, go through that space and be like, can I experience consciousness, all of it? Or am I just experiencing what I experience through the capacity that this vehicle holds? And in my own exploration, I realized that my capacity is not just what's inside of me. I have capacity to tap into all of it. And actually, one of the main practices that through the years I've been doing, which is a form of Tibetan yoga, the main or one of the main things there is to expand my awareness or my consciousness so much that I'm able to encompass all of space or all of the universe. Therefore, tapping into all of that and not just what's within this vehicle that is my body. So I think that a lot of times it's challenging to try to explain certain things because some of the things we need to experience them and we need to live them. But I hope that through all of that, I answered a little bit around consciousness.
So it's sort of like, if I can say it and if I can explain it in layman's terms or in Jerry's terms, maybe. If I were standing in a forest and initially my consciousness is just me understanding that I'm in a forest, and then eventually my consciousness goes to feeling the grass under my feet. And then eventually my consciousness goes to looking at the trees around me and recognizing the different colors of the leaves of the trees around me. And then it expands out to hearing the birds in the trees and hearing them, tweeting and making noises. And then it expands maybe out to watching the squirrels jump from branch to branch to branch to branch. Is it similar to basically just taking your current view of whatever that looks like, which, like you said, for most people is just their box, their frame, if you
Mhm.
will, taking that and then just literally expanding it piece by piece by piece, not only literally seeing more things and hearing more things and smelling more things, but perceiving more things.
Yes. Yes and no. So I'm going to say the following.
Yeah.
Um, how we experience things is key here. So at initially, I would expand in that way as what you're saying. I would expand and allow more things to be within the scope of my awareness. And I would expand and expand and expand and expand. Eventually, I understood, and this keeps on being like sometimes I do that, and sometimes I do what I'm going to share now. I am not separate from that. Therefore, I don't need to expand anything. I just need to allow that. So there's a difference between me, this Brian, expanding my sphere of consciousness or awareness of what's around me to an understanding that I'm not separate from that. I don't need to expand anything. Going back to the layers of the onion that you were saying, I just need to realize that I am not separate in that forest. I am the trees. I am those squirrels. I am the wind. I am the water. I am everything. And when I realize, and by realizing, I mean like experience it, not just know that there's no separation. When I realize that, there's nothing to expand. We are already that. Again, the drop in the ocean, it's already the ocean. So how do we allow ourselves to be all of that? And this is part of the process. And sometimes the process, we start more with okay, let's expand. Let's feel the grass underneath our feet. Let's pay attention to the trees. Let's include more and more and more and expand. Eventually, we realize, you and me, there's no difference. Now, we do experience a specific, as I said, specific configuration, specific wavelength of all of that. And that is what enables us to live our own unique life and to be able to realize that within the oneness or the no separation of consciousness, we have that specific configuration. We have the specific ways, the specific talents, the specific gifts, the specific everything that we're bringing into this world, which means that we don't need to be like anybody else. We are here to experience a unique perspective of that wholeness. So there's this beautiful dance for me of sometimes it's like, okay, I'm going to be Brian, and sometimes it's like, I'm just going to be. This is a really interesting balance and dance that I keep on playing. Um, because, on an everyday level, it's like, who cares about, being one with everything? You need to go to work, you need to be with your kids, you need to have your relationships, you need to deal with money. It's like, how is that supporting my life? Well, there's levels that I believe that supports it. We need to focus as well on, how do we bring more awareness to where we are? How do we bring more presence to what's going on in our lives? How do we balance the healing process, the expansive process, with what we are doing every single day? We can do all of that. It's just that we need to understand as well priorities, we need to understand tendencies, we need to understand circumstances, and we need to be kind with that.
I we're literally just like getting on the tip of this, as far as I can tell. So we're gonna go ahead and wrap up. I'd love to have you on again. I'd love to have you on again because I think we could go down, we could unpack a whole lot because there's so much there that I I know I'm going to go back and listen to specifically some of the practices that you were talking about and some of the ideas you were talking about. And what I caught at the end of that is I I used to relate awareness and consciousness, which I'm sure they're related, but I guess I used to link them. And I
Mhm.
feel like what you're saying is they're different. Becoming aware and having more consciousness are two different things.
Yes, in some ways we talk about it as they are the same,
Mhm.
and in some ways it's I would say a lot of times how I relate to it is I am consciousness, there is consciousness. Awareness is how I allow myself to tap into that.
Mm,
So I'm just becoming more aware of that. Now, when we might say awareness, sometimes we're talking about the same. Instead of the process of being aware of things, awareness, we might be saying, and this is semantics, we might be saying consciousness, um, and we're using the word awareness.
hmm
So again, this, like how we connect with it is important.
hmm
Consciousness, again, we might call that energy, we might call that God, we might call it the universe, whatever we want to call it. Um, we might call it awareness as well. The process that we go through is through awareness. Becoming more conscious is that awareness.
Mm, that's good. Brian, I appreciate you so much, brother. Thank you for all the wisdom that you brought in today. Where can everybody find you?
First of all, and Sherry, thank you for inviting me. Thank you for sharing as well and being open to sharing your experience. I always, feel like that's so important to share our own experiences so that others can also understand. Like we are also in this journey. Like we are not sharing stuff for others. We are sharing these things for ourselves, and hopefully others resonate with it and take something out of this. So thank you for having the space to for me to share as well. And if people resonate at all with what I do, they can find me through Brian Berneman, social media, Instagram, Facebook, my website, brianberneman.com. Um, you can go there and check what I do. I work, with individuals. I work with organizations. I do so much different stuff that, if someone resonates, just go and look online there. And hopefully, whether you actually do something with that or not, if you're listening to this, if one thing you resonated with, take that one thing and the rest just let it go.
A lot of truth to that. Don't get overwhelmed with yourself. Find something to use and use it.
Yeah, definitely. But yeah, thank you, Cherry. And being kind with ourselves as we move through the process of living life, it's so important. And just more of these conversations.
Most definitely. Brian, appreciate you so much, man.
Thank you, Cherry. Likewise.